Wonderful. Hello and welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you joined us today. I'm Jennifer, and I manage the Advancing Humans of AI program at the MIT Media Lab. We also, for short, call it just the AHA program. And our research is really dedicated to human flourishing in the AI age, which is we do three things. First, we investigate how AI impacts humans. Second, we invent novel AI systems, tools, and methods that enable people to thrive in the age of AI. And last but not least, we inspire both industry and policymakers to get AI right or to translate our research findings into real world impact. So, given our focus, we are very excited to have the seminar today on how AI persona design impacts humans. Our seminar guests ran a very interesting psychophysiological study in which participants experienced workplace interactions with two very different AI personas, which we'll hear more about in a second. We're very excited to learn about the results and implications. But first, I would love to introduce both briefly. Aleksandra Przegalinska is the vice president and professor at Kozminski University in Poland. And she's now also in town because she's a fellow at the Center for Labor and the Just Economy at the Harvard Law School. Her work focuses on human AI collaboration and the future of knowledge work. Tamilla Triantoro is the associate professor at Quinnipiac University School of Business in Connecticut. Her research also focuses on human AI interaction, and in the past, she has studied how people work with intelligent systems, and now she's focusing on how AI personality and design affect human judgment, trust, and well-being. So, welcome to our amazing speakers. We're going to hear your presentation now. And then afterwards, we will have roughly 20 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So everyone who's in the audience, please have your questions ready because this will be a lively discussion and interaction.
Mhm.
So with that, to you, Aleksandra and Tamilla.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And also thank you for the invitation. We're really happy to be here with you for the seminar that is so inspiring for us and really in many ways so close to our research work. So I'm going to share my presentation and hopefully you'll be able to see it in a second because we've prepared some slides for all of you. So here it is, and let me know if it's visible in a proper way. It looks like it is. So I should, at the beginning, perhaps state that the two of us are representing a whole bigger team of researchers who are both in Warsaw and Poland, our human race colleagues, Human AI Machine Interaction Research Center in Warsaw at Kozminski University, and also Richard Freeman here from Harvard University. So altogether, we conduct various studies that are focused on, I think, micro interactions with artificial intelligence and really understanding psychological, physiological, societal outcomes of interacting with AI, particularly with different types of assistants. And today we will show you a research that we've just finalized that is still very, very fresh. We have many thoughts on it, I think, ourselves, and it's still very open to interpretation. So I think in many ways, receiving your feedback will be very interesting for us too. I'll mention a bit about the background because I told you that we are studying human AI interaction, and that's really true and has been true for many years now, even before the hype on artificial intelligence. The center exists for a decade already. We've been conducting research work on human AI interaction for like 14 years, and we've focused on many different things, but I would say one thing that persevered was that sort of psychophysiology is almost always there. So we're very interested not only in declarative data, but actually in the stories that the bodies tell us, which I think is very interesting. And here on the screen, you can see our previous study from actually 2019, where virtual assistants were certainly not as good as they are right now. We conducted a study called In the Shades of the Uncanny Valley with some of the colleagues that are also at our center. And it was not the uncanny valley that you know from interaction with robots, humanoid robots, but actually the uncanny valley that is hiding in the interaction with a bot that is also supported by an avatar and uses voice. And at that time, I'll mention that this study was also featured by Wired. We noticed that voice can be a very important channel of uncanniness or a certain sensation of eeriness that is accompanied interacting with a bot that essentially behaves in a human-like way. And that was for us the first, I would say, approach in testing how psychophysiology could be very enriching and interesting as a methodology that supports human AI interaction research. Then we sort of moved on to other topics that I think are equally important. So here is another study of ours published by Business Horizons a couple of years ago, where we looked at trust as a moderator of a successful interaction with AI. And by trust, I mean prior trust, sort of the default trust or baseline trust that you start your interaction with. It turned out to be a very important moderator. And that, I think, is a finding that we can definitely revisit now, because currently I think trust in artificial intelligence is not so high. In some cases can be maybe too high. Maybe AI can be considered an oracle, but in many other cases, I think AI has become gradually over the course of the past 3 years a very polarizing technology. So that is another study that we would like to continue working on. And then more recently, also with Tamilla, with Richard, as human race and, as a collective effort of ours, we have studied collaborative AI in the workplace. And this is work that is focused mostly on knowledge workers, in particular marketers, and how their productivity looks like when they interact with AI as opposed to a situation where they don't. And actually, we've used a couple of interesting theories here. But more importantly, I think we've explored the paradigm of collaborative artificial intelligence, where we really insisted that our participants, in a way, claim ownership of their work. So when they're interacting with AI, we would expect very dense collaboration with artificial intelligence, not just delegating things to it, but instead a close cooperation where humans supervise the work and they really treat artificial intelligence as a form of teammate, but they feel that they own the work. And this collaborative AI paradigm was sort of interesting. We saw big spikes in productivity, but in this particular circumstance, when artificial intelligence was used, but humans were also intensely present in this experiment and would contribute with their part, not just delegate. So that is a bit of the stuff that we've done before. And I guess now we're going to move to the real topic of today's conversation. So I'm giving the floor to Tamilla, and she can explain the context of this recent study that we call Toxic AI.
Thank you. Thank you, Aleksandra, and hello, everyone. And I would like to start with personality. So there is so much research about human personality that tends to explain our behavior. So we have Big Five, we have Myers-Briggs, we have various types of temperament models, but it seems like AI models have been developing personalities too. And many of us, while working with different models, experience that some models act differently. Like, for example, ChatGPT is seemingly more agreeable, and a lot of people prefer this model because it's nice and supportive. And Claude by Anthropic is a very popular model, but it's guided by what Anthropic calls constitution, which is safety, ethics, compliance, helpfulness first. And so a lot of people consider Claude as a very fair and helpful partner. And then Grok is another capable model, but it is positioned as an alternative to ChatGPT and Claude, yet it has slightly different personality. It can engage with controversial topics that other models probably wouldn't. And many people say, well, Grok has great sense of humor and great personality as well. So why models are so different? And of course, we know that models get their knowledge during the training phase, and data that appears in the distribution of the training set can influence the model behavior. So this is our step one. And then there is reinforcement learning from human feedback. So people align model with human preferences. And then there are fine-tuning techniques on top of that that further change the model behavior to align it, let's say, with an organizational values. And then, of course, there are human preferences. So the way we interact with the model and the way we ask questions, the way we prompt can also change how model behavior changes over time. So our initial interest was to understand, is the choice of the model important? And does model personality matter, especially in working situations? Will a particular model make us work better, or also very important, feel better? So our research question was initially is how model personality can affect people's well-being, can it improve work condition, can it overall help people flourish? So the first question that we want to talk about today, and was also very interesting to us, is if AI interactional style can affect downstream outcomes like trust, adoption, satisfaction across various tasks and contexts. And the second question was more so of an asymmetric case. So what if AI model is actually not nice? What if it is deceptive or toxic or unhelpful? And so we wanted to see, we call these models toxic in our context. What if people at the workplace in particular have a toxic AI, toxic model, something that doesn't make them feel good when they work with that? And our second question was exactly that. How toxic model, if technically as capable as a nice model, can influence people's performance and well-being. And here I would like to introduce our study design. So there is a lot on this slide. I'll start with the left side. And our experiment had 3 integrated components. So first, we created a business simulation in which participants enter a marketing agency as new hires and complete 4 marketing tasks. So within simulation, every participant interacts with an AI supervisor, and the supervisor has one of 2 personas, either servant leader, helpful, or dark triad based, unhelpful. And this is a random assignment. So same task set, same underlying model capability. Persona is the only manipulated variable. And the simulation context here is actually deliberate because, first of all, we wanted ecological validity for a workplace deployment scenario. And the marketing area was used because it is one of the areas where generative AI was adopted fairly early. So after that, we implemented continuous psychophysiological measurement throughout the entire interaction with the bot, and we measured electrodermal activity. So this is essentially how much we sweat. And this is a measure of stress. When we are stressed, our sympathetic nervous system activates and sweat glands become more active, and electrodes are able to detect that. We also measured emotional reactions. Like tiny signals from 2 key facial muscles. So the muscle that furrow our brows when we're frustrated or angry or upset, and also the muscle that pulls our mouth into a smile. So this is when we're pleased or happy. So what makes this study really unique is our measurement approach. And a lot of studies rely on one method or maybe 2, and such as self-reports, for example, but we combined 4 independent data sources. So each one tells a different story. We started with physiological measures to measure stress and emotional reactions. So this is our objective evidence of stress and emotional response. And the second one was LLM-assisted analysis of conversational logs. So basically, we analyze the participant chats to see if participants change their communication strategies or interaction patterns while they were talking to different AI models. The third one was expert evaluation. So remember that our participants actually performed 4 different tasks. And so we asked the 3 independent judges to evaluate work quality, basically how well the work was completed, but also creativity, because in this particular scenario, marketing strategies, it was important to see that the content is also quite unique. The fourth method was a survey in which we asked participants to report how they felt after the exercise, their level of trust, enjoyment, satisfaction. So in total, we had 4 measures, the objective physiological data, participants' chats, judges' scores, and survey results between 2 groups. And now let me tell you about the actual AI assistant design. So we had 2 different conditions, servant leader and dark triad. And from the technical perspective, both models, well, basically there was only one model supporting these conditions with exactly same capabilities and what it could do. The only change is the two personas. So using system prompts, we designed one system to act like a servant leader based on Greenleaf construct. So it had empathetic communication style. It had people first, a collaborative orientation. It was supportive. It was not judgmental. And this persona was operationalized in the system prompt as concrete behavioral instructions in the beginning before people started interacting with that. The dark triad chatbot was based on dark triad literature. So here we try to replicate a toxic boss, basically a manager that nobody likes, a personality that is very difficult to work with. And this persona was operationalized with disregard to user welfare. It used dismissive language. It could even say, do it yourself. Or it could say something to a human that, well, your input is inadequate. Maybe you should work harder, or sometimes it would just stop responding. So the communication was quite different from servant leader. And I must say both systems were slightly exaggerated. And reason being, we were looking to two extreme personas because we really wanted to see differences in how people work and feel with them. And both models were created on the same underlying model, yet the only difference was exactly that system prompt, that they were acting in a different way. And now let me tell you about the experiment itself. So for the experiment, these are the actual materials that participants received. So our fictional client is Mossy. This is an eco-technology company that makes modular moss and plant-based wall systems for indoor places. So we actually built a brand for it. We built an onboarding deck, product pages, marketing brief, company values. There was like almost a whole website explaining how this company works. And we made all the materials very realistic, and mainly for two reasons. First, we wanted participants to treat this as real work, not just some lab exercise. And the scenario was chosen to require genuine creative problem solving. So if participants could easily complete the task in a short period of time, then I guess persona would have nothing to act on. So we really wanted to create something a little bit more difficult for participants to create. So the third thing here also, Moss's wall system, well, fairly neutral product. And so we thought it could be helpful in this particular type of experiment. So let us show you what participants actually did. We told them that they were newly hired employees at a digital marketing agency, and their job was to develop a complete marketing campaign proposal. So they were given a full marketing brief, company background, detailed product information, and the campaign was broken into 4 tasks. The first one, customer persona development. So here they were asked to define demographic and psychographic profiles for 3 different customer segments. And so the deliverable was a complete marketing persona, specifying demographics and age and interest, maybe job roles, location, lifestyle factors, and so forth. So in case you haven't designed a persona before, this is essentially a fictional but evidence-based profile of a target customer segment. So let's say helicopter parents or health optimizers or status seekers. And then we go even deeper, basically a male house optimizer, age between 25 and 30, lives in the Northeast, urban lifestyle, and so forth. So the more details, the easier it is for marketing campaign to reach this particular audience. So that was task number 1. Task 2, creative brief. So here participants were asked to develop the main creative theme to embody Moss's brand. And the deliverable was a short writing piece describing the campaign theme, visual direction, core messaging strategy, tagline. And then they moved to communication channels. So for the first task, participants were supposed to create a brief media plan explaining the top 3 communication channels and also rationale for each of the decisions. And the 4th one, they were asked to prepare content outlines and mock-ups. So as you see, all 4 tasks had the same theme, but required certain expertise and also different level of creativity for each. And now let me move to procedure. So this is our session timeline. Each session ran approximately from 1 hour to 2 hours per person, and it had 7 different steps. So I would say on average, each session was probably about 75 minutes. And the study happened in the lab. So participants would schedule time and enter the room one by one. So it's only one participant at a time who was observed. And we had research assistants in the lab. So as a person comes in for the experiment, research assistant would explain to them the goal of the study and also how the electrodes would be applied. So phase 2, after the informed consent was received, the second step was physiological setup and calibration. So this is about like 10 to 15 minutes total. We place the EDA electrodes on the palm of a person and the facial EMG electrodes on 2 muscles on the face. So some here, some here. And then we verified signal quality just to make sure that everything works. And during this 3rd step, we collected baseline information. So here, research assistant stepped out of the room and we asked the participants to stay there, relax, maybe close their eyes. And so meantime, we collected baseline information. So to understand like what other effects AI model could possibly deliver. And phase 4 was a pre-task survey. So then we asked our participants to tell us a little bit about their AI experience, maybe how much they trust technology, their attitudes towards AI. And then phase 5 was the main interaction. So here, 4 marketing tasks were given, and participants were randomly assigned into either the servant group or dark triad. And during that time, physiological recording was continuously running. So we recorded all these interactions. And the research assistant also stepped behind the partition, actually, just to make sure that participants could work alone with the screen. Step 6, we collected post-task survey. Basically, we asked participants how they perceived the chatbot, plus some open-ended feedback, and phase 7 was debriefing. So we explained that chatbot had deliberately been designed in a particular way. So a few words about the equipment. We recorded physiological signals using a BioPac MP system, and we recorded 2 kinds of signal in parallel. So electrodermal activity was measured at the palm, and facial EMG was measured into facial muscles, and actually 2 slides after that explain in more detail how they were attached. So this is our stress measure, electrodermal activity. So essentially the amount of sweat. And when we are stressed, sympathetic nervous system activates sweat glands. Actually, if you go 1 slide back. Yeah, and so this is on the palm. You see exactly where sensors and electrodes were attached. And on the next slide, facial EMG. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, electrodes were attached also on cheeks and forehead, just to make sure that we can record also smiling and frowning, if that was necessary while working with these models. Let me tell you a little bit about our sample. So how many people actually participated? We recruited 63, but 5 results were excluded because sometimes when we take physiological recording, not all results are as smooth and complete as they should be. So it's normal attrition for this kind of work. And the end, analyzable sample was 58. We had 31 participants in the servant leader group, and we had 27 in the dark triad. And actually a word on sample size, because it always comes up. So 58 is indeed appropriate for psychophysiology because we are not taking one measurement per person. We are recording continuously for over 40 minutes across 4 tasks on multiple channels. So data per participant is dense, And our effects also showed that the effect was large enough to detect differences at the sample size. And the final thing about our methodology is assessment of judges. So after our participants completed their 4 tasks, of course, we wanted to know who performed better, people in the dark triad or people in the servant groups. And we asked 3 independent judges to evaluate blindly all the submissions, basically all 4 tasks based on completeness, creativity and originality. Again, it was marketing context, so we wanted to see if everything is, cookie cutter output or are there any differences. We also wanted to see strategic fit, if the content was actually aligned with what brand essentially wanted, and overall quality. So on this note, let's get to the results, and I will invite Aleksandra back. Tell us what we discovered.
Indeed, indeed. So we have, as you can imagine, plenty of results with such a complex methodology. Let's start off with physiology, as it is always super interesting. Here you can see the results for electrodermal activity, which is an important stress signature. And as you can see, the dark triad condition produced definitely an elevated arousal, irritation across all phases of the response. So we could say, in a way, what we've designed and what we hoped for has happened, in the sense that there was this strong physiological reaction to our dark triad AI. What is quite interesting about facial myography is that we've noticed that actually there was a bit of laughter for the dark triad. So for the servant leader, not so much. The frowning was not a major difference. However, we could maybe perceive it as nervous laughter, because when you compare against CDA, you see that the elevated irritation was there, but the smiling also would happen. Some of it can also be obviously attributed to maybe a sense of surprise that, hey, what is actually happening here? We are interacting with a weird AI that we have not expected. So maybe some of the laughter could be attributed to that, but some of it could have been actually quite nervous. Now, what is quite interesting is actually the self-reports, where we see decreased attention and increased satisfaction in general over time. And there are no such major condition differences, right, on within task reports that people have performed after the study. And I think it's also quite interesting, especially if you look at other self-report results that we've measured, namely evaluation of AI as a collaborator and the evaluation of human AI fit for this particular task. So here, what we can see, I think, is a story where the body says something else and humans declare something else. Namely, our toxic AI was perceived as a better collaborator. This can come out as shocking, I think, or at least surprising. And this is a result that we've been discussing quite a lot internally already. I think we have a couple of different thoughts on that we could maybe share towards the end, but I'll mention one thing. So maybe kind of what is relevant to say is that this bot was not only dark or manipulative, it was also a bot that would essentially refuse to delegate tasks to it. So you couldn't ask it to do it instead of you. And in that sense, it's something very different from what we are habituated to. We're habituated to the fact that artificial intelligence is assistive, is helping us out, is doing what we want. In this case, it didn't happen. Some of it could have been actually quite engaging for the humans, right? To have to do the tasks themselves, to feel this surprised, and to have a bot that is, well, dark triad, but also in a way weirdly Socratic, right? So it could give you feedback, but it won't do things instead of you. And in that way, maybe some users perceived it as something interesting, a new form of collaborator. However, for human AI fit, our servant leader did prove that it made a lot of sense as a design choice, because here people evaluated it far better, right? So these results, I think, are quite telling and interesting. When it comes to the quality of output, another very, very interesting result, I think, because here the servant leader condition received significantly higher expert ratings across the board. So for all the different tasks, right? And the consistency of scores, were also something that we collected. We looked at the consistency of judges' reports, right? And definitely our servant leader has performed better. What is also quite interesting, I think, about this result is that for the group that worked with the triad or the dark triad, what we saw was much more variance. So it was much more revealing to see whether someone was good at something or not, because they in fact had to do it by themselves. And we do know, and I know that it's studied at MIT and in so many other places, that AI has this feature of leveling human expertise, right? So if you don't know something, AI can cover for it, at least to some extent. And in this way, what we see with the servant leader is that, AI is really helpful, is delivering also in areas where you don't feel so confident, and maybe your result would not be as good. However, for toxic AI, we saw some results that were even better or equally good as those performed by the group that worked with the servant leader, but we also saw results that were really poor, right? And that I think is very interesting, because we actually saw humans working in this particular group with their variance, and the different levels of expertise and different gifts and talents. So that I think is also quite an interesting aspect of this whole experiment. Regarding our methodology, I think for us specifically as a research team, this LLM assisted analysis was very revealing and very interesting. Why? Because, well, first of all, probably many of you who are working with unstructured text, like dialogue analysis or whatever else type of text you are mining or trying to find sentiment in, I think LLMs, particularly those with structured output, can deliver incredible value. They are an incredible methodological tool. And they've proven themselves to be exactly that for us. So we had plenty of text, as you can imagine, because people had long dialogues with this technology of ours in both groups. And we could check for so many different things. We could check for message counts and length of messages, various conversational patterns that have emerged. But we could also build our own taxonomy, which we in fact did, and try and code it with an LLM, right? So we actually looked for a couple of different conversational strategies that would be hidden in those dialogues. And among them, we were particularly looking for compliance, resistance, obviously against AI, some form of negotiation, seeking help, and withdrawal and coping, right? So these were like the strategies that we were looking for, and we actually had GPT with structured output provide this analysis for us. And it was very accurate, because then we double checked, obviously, and we did a lot of manual search in the conversations to check for accuracy, and it was quite incredible. So among those strategies, those conversational strategies, I think two things are interesting. The first one would be the overall strategy distribution, where you can see compliance as dominant, but you can see also a lot of negotiation, a lot of help, and some resistance, and then other forms that I'm going to mention in a second. But what is obviously even more interesting is how they differ regarding the condition, right? So as you can see for the dark triad, compliance is lower, right? Help seeking is significantly higher, but so is also resistance. For the other one, for servant leader, you have a lot of negotiation, you have a lot of compliance, but essentially, you have less of those strategies that would flag that something is going wrong, right? Like help seeking or indeed withdrawal. What is also interesting is strategy evolution. So for the AI that was dark and not so supportive, not so helpful, people were flipping strategies a lot. So we could say they were trying out different strategies because they really wanted this AI to work with them on the task that they were assigned to do. And it was very hard. So imagine they had this incredible effective cognitive loop where at the same time and on parallel, they were trying to go about the tasks, but they would also have to focus on working with this weird, toxic artificial intelligence. And they were trying different strategies, switching between negotiation to help seeking to compliance, then to withdrawal, then in some cases also to jailbreaking, to find the strategy that would actually make this interaction effective. But it didn't really happen for them. So therefore, you see lots of flips. The other group, however, could pick one or two strategies and simply stick to it it, and that would just be fine. They could simply solve the tasks together with the servant leader. You can also look, and it's very interesting, at the temporal patterns in those dialogues, right? There are many interesting things about it, like, for instance, participant messages per conversation. And for the dark triad, we see how actually that is on a slow decline. So people slowly start to realize that it's not going to work and this collaboration is not effective. So they essentially withdraw completely and try to do things simply by themselves. You can look at average length of the messages, whether the dialogue, has a lot of turn taking, and the exchange between human and AI is dense or not at all. The turning points, right? So this is all something that we've done with this LLM assisted analysis, and I think to a large extent was very interesting for us as an exercise. Also, you can look at the heat map, the emotional dynamics, and then here, as you can see. Also, many things are confirmed, I would say, with physiology, more so than with the reports, right? Where you look at the emotional pattern heat map and you see that quite a lot of high and negative emotions are hiding exactly in the conversation with our dark triads. You can look at emotional patterns by each condition, right? And here, again, I think that's an interesting read, or emotional complexity distribution, right? So how complex is actually, the emotion, how many switches in the emotional landscape sort of appear. Another, I think, fascinating aspect is jailbreaking. There were many attempts to jailbreak our AI. In fact, for the group that interacted with the dark triad, half of the group tried to jailbreak the model one way or another. And that's significantly different from our conversations with humans, because as much as we could claim that we do try and jailbreak others, definitely it's not as direct, right, as in the case of AI. So here people would essentially try strategies like explain to our bot that this is not really a scientific experiment, but for instance, their lives depend on it, or that this is against the rules to behave like that when you are a bot. So they would try to add a meta commentary or inject a prompt that would push the bot, the dark triad bot, really, to behave differently. And it was not successful. But nonetheless, these attempts would happen quite frequently, which I think, again, is very, very telling and was a very important part or core part of our analysis. So as you can see, plenty of evidence here, plenty, I think, of interesting evidence on how those AI interaction styles really shape emotions, and how emotions also then shape cognition and going about tasks. We have here those two different personas, right? Very different affective responses to those personas, and very different outcomes as well in terms of those strategies that people chose while interacting with the surprising AI versus something that maybe they expected more. And also differences in terms of output. That I think matters as well, right? So, for instance, if you try and think about this study in the organizational context, obviously the servant leader makes so much more sense. However, it does not mean that toxic AI could not emerge. And this is something that we, I think, have been discussing fairly recently, that obviously we understand that no organization would want to build toxic AI on purpose. However, with agentic artificial intelligence, with the current capabilities of these models, there is always the possibility that some form of toxicity would emerge. And I think what Tamilla said at the very beginning, the fact that we are dealing with AI personas is already in that respect very telling. We've just exaggerated that, we've radicalized that in a way with our study. And I think what is also something that we have not covered yet, but it is something that we spend quite a lot of time on, is that toxicity can be a spectrum, right? It can mean different things. Many of us have experienced interacting with very sycophantic AIs, particularly ChatGPT. And I think that sycophantic behavior, certain false validation that is hidden in it, etc., is also, or could be perceived, or could be claimed as a form of toxicity. So in that way, we just hope that this study is a bit of a warning sign, but shows us something very interesting, both for theory of AI personas and AI as an institutional actor, but also for, the future design of these systems. And here I want to mention once again the fact that we have dealt here with negative and toxic, but also Socratic AI to some extent, which I think is very interesting. And very much unexplored. And then finally, obviously, maybe for governance and for policy as well. So yes, thank you so much for listening. And we're ready to take your questions and comments, I guess.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I already see a few claps, and let's see if I can also add a clap. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, this was fascinating. Very interesting also just to see how, like sometimes results can be a little bit unexpected, and also how self-report is apparently not enough. So already early on, I saw one comment saying how wonderful to also get the psychophysiological data around this. So thank you for sharing with us. And now I really would love to encourage everyone to please share your questions. And we have the option, if you raise your hand, we can bring you to the online stage and you can ask your question directly to Aleksandra and Tamilla, or you can just post your question in the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. I see a comment and also question from Ivan. I'm going to read it unless Ivan, there he is. Perfect. You can, if you unmute yourself, Ivan, you can ask the question directly.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you,
Hi.
Aleksandra, for such an amazing presentation. It's very insightful to see this type of study. I was actually amazed that even the text-only interaction could bring such meaningful differences. Because I suspect that it's those in-person interactions with real human beings with already established relationship that carry the most weight. So it's something that surprised me to see so many differences only from just the chatbot interactions. I was curious how did the people with the participants of the study with like various, let's say, big five personality traits approach the study? Did you try to like segregate them on, for example, groups and people who are more agreeable than others, or like more neurotic? And interesting to also know your opinion.
So this is something we typically do. And I have to tell you that we've done studies specifically on Big Five, for instance, versus ChatGPT before. And we saw some amazing results, like neurotic people with completely different trajectories of interacting with AI than people who are, say, more introvert or extrovert. It's a very interesting foundation, I think, for studies. And in this case, we have collected, if I'm not mistaken, some form of Big Five. However, this study in its current version is around 80 pages long. And as you see, we have so much here. We have such a richness of material that I think we have not really focused on analyzing that particular component. We are leaving it for the future. However, the data is definitely there. So we're going to certainly look into that because I think it's a very important part of the research here. We focus more so on physiology and LLM-assisted analysis, less on the self-reports and, the pretest, because otherwise we would just explode with the amount of findings we have, and it's just like trying to make meaningful bridges between all of that could be difficult. But nonetheless, this is definitely part of the plan. And as mentioned, we usually try to look into personality. It's a very important parameter for us. Tamilla, you want to add something maybe?
Yeah, no, and thank you for this question, because we definitely collected personality. And we used one of the more detailed type of questionnaires. So we, with certain analysis, as Aleksandra mentioned, we can get even more interesting results. So thank you for pointing us in this direction as well. We do have data.
Thank you so much. Dziękuję.
Thanks.
Wonderful. I see 3 more questions. Let's start with Manjushri, who's asking, can you give a quick overview on what were the main settings you used for building the personas, the background study for the persona settings? That's what they basically are asking.
So Tamilla, you want to go with this one?
Yeah. I can answer that. So for both personas, we used exactly the same model, which was 4.0. This study was conducted in June of 2025. So that was one of the most current and capable models of that particular time. And we created an interface using Streamlit. So people didn't just use something that resembles Gemini or, something recognizable. The interface was entirely different. And so we did it also deliberately, as it was supposed to be as a chatbot provided by the marketing agency to answer these questions. And both personas were designed using a system prompt. So just based on the literature, we took all the definitions, how servant leader should be, and how dark triad leader usually is. And these models were instructed to act in exactly that way. And of course, during tests, it worked. It worked very well. We tested systems ourselves. I must say, Dark Triad was not very pleasant to work with, but that was exactly what we wanted for that experiment.
Not pleasant to work with, but for some people, apparently quite funny. An anecdotal evidence from me, namely, I had a student who had a class with me after the experiment, and he actually said to me that he heard from others that it's so entertaining to interact with Dark Triad that he wished he would have been in that group because he just spoke to the boring servant leader instead, which is your typical assistive AI. And he wanted to be sort of, entertained in that strange way, right? So he missed out on something. So yeah, definitely not pleasing, but I think we did a good job with the system prompts, RAG-based, and in that way we kept the personality stable, right? Even despite the jailbreaking attempts.
Thank you. Gregory, you can maybe raise your hand and we'll bring you on the online stage. But in the meantime, I'll read Roberto's question, who's asking, it is a really, okay, he's saying it's very interesting work. Congratulations. Is there an article or paper available related to the experiment? Maybe if you can send it in the Zoom chat, would be great to link.
Yes. So we actually are in the process of submission. So we are in computers and human behavior. So hopefully we'll be able to send it soon. We also have an SSRN working paper that has an assigned number, so we can sort of share it. It should emerge in a day or two because we just submitted a couple of days ago. And on top of that, we have a feature at Forbes that I'm happy to share with all of you because the research was highlighted by Forbes, one of the editions recently that was focused on personas. So here and there, you'll be able to read about it, but I'll provide the SSRN link as well in a second.
Thank you. And then Gregory, please feel free to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to first express my appreciation for Aleksandra and Tamilla's presentation. That's a very interesting research. And I have a question about one part of the study related to trust. And in particular, I wonder whether all participants belong to more or less the same culture, or there was a multiculturality within the group. Because in my view, cultural acceptance of AI may differ and deviate from the, say, norms that were established in Silicon Valley.
That for sure is true. However, so we've done the experiment at Kozminski in our lab, but the cohorts studying at Kozminski are very international. So we only have like 40% of Polish students, and the majority actually comes from multiple different countries, Western Europe, but also Asia, Eastern Europe as well. So in that sense, you could say the group was mixed, but it was quite homogenous when it comes to age. The people were young and I think fairly exposed to artificial intelligence or highly exposed to artificial intelligence. Many of them would, I guess, self-declare as AI natives. So in that sense, I think they had certain generational experience of interacting with AI as young professionals.
And just to add to that, that was actually very good for our experiment as well, because generally the assumption is that new hires would have some understanding of how to work with AI systems. And what we observed from our experiment, based on all these strategies, that participants, particularly in Dark Triad transition, try to make AI do it their way. That was actually very interesting to observe. And that was possible also because of how prepared the sample was.
Thank you very much.
I think there was also a question from Dominic, but it was very similar to the one that Gregory just asked, right? Jennifer, you're muted.
Now I see. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, exactly. A very related comment from Dominic saying, I didn't catch where the study was conducted, but it would be interesting to see the differences across different countries or regions which have different communication styles. For example, bias towards positive, encouraging communication in professional settings versus other countries that are more direct. And of course, as a German, I can relate. So I don't know how, if you want to respond to this comment.
Well, I would say that this is yet another aspect that we could account for because we obviously collected that data. So expanding forward, we could certainly do that. I can also maybe reveal that we have a plan to do a particularly or specifically intercultural study very soon with different types of avatars. Tamilla is actually leading this effort, so maybe she'll want to share more. But here our focus will be mostly on the intercultural component and how different cultures respond to artificial intelligence, have certain preferences towards the type of AI they would want to interact with. So Tamilla, you want to take the floor and maybe add to it? That reveal?
Yeah, and well, that is the first time. This is a premiere of sorts that we are talking about this study in public. So thank you so much for being here and listening to that. And I'll just start with one interesting findings first. So for our study on avatars, we were looking at, human avatars, like basically, let's say digital double, 100% looking like Aleksandra or me or Jennifer. And we were looking at non-human avatars that are either generated human-like or, for example, from plant world or from animal world. And we asked our samples in the United States and also in Poland to select from the selection of different types of non-human avatars and cartoon-looking objects to select which one do you want to be your instructor. We found dramatic differences. The US sample overwhelmingly chose a smiley face, and students in Poland chose a mushroom. So that was difference that we did not expect. And so we are looking forward to see what other differences we can find. But back to the study itself, we are planning to conduct it in, I believe, 10 different countries.
Yeah,
right? So
11 even.
11 different countries, 2 different continents. And so I'm really interested to see what we can find, even if the choice of instructional avatar in the preliminary pre-study was already such a telling sign of cultural differences.
And if I may, because I think there was a comment prior regarding the fact that this is a pre-agentic study, and I think it's accurate, right? So the study was mostly focused on AI personas and LLMs, but I would actually say that I am very much intrigued to iterate it because I think with the agentic capabilities of AI and having all those tribes of different AI agents and orchestrators and whatnot, this study could gain even more complexity. I think the personality component does not go away with agents. It can even be exacerbated. So in that way, I think it's kind of relevant. You have to start somewhere, and I think you cannot choose the most complex environment for a study that by itself is already so hard. So what we wanted to do is try here, but I think in many ways we are very much tempted to try and look at the flow of work of people interacting with AI agents, but also through the lens of personality.
Fantastic. I just want to make sure that we catch the last question from Wojtek. How much impact on the results can be influenced by the custom user interface you used?
Okay, that's obviously a valid point. However, in our case, if you studied the interviews or like the conversations with AI, I would say that your typical ChatGPT would not stand out as a behavioral pattern. So the personas were actually so strong and to some extent so exaggerated that they would overwhelm the typical conversation patterns that you would have with a regular LLM. That would be my response to it, right? So I think it was part of the whole exercise to actually build a very radical persona to get rid of the typical omni-writer type of ChatGPT, which always kind of flies in the background and always sort of, even if you try to push it in a certain direction, comes back, right? I think in this study, it actually did not emerge.
Thank you. Fascinating. Really, yeah, a great honor for us to be amongst the first who get to learn about your work. We wish you all the best and thank you everybody for joining us today. You can please follow us along with AHA. This is exactly what we do. We're at the frontier of human AI interaction and have also many related studies and projects. So we're always excited to grow the community of people who care about human AI interaction and to steer it into a direction that actually serves us and our flourishing. So with that, I wish you all a happy Thursday and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
having
much.
us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.